of the Alcohol and Drug Policy Commission. We have sort of a light agenda today. We'll see how long our main component of the agenda goes. But we'll have, do some welcomes here in a second. We've got director updates, and we'll move into group discussion on RCC funding. And then I will make sure that I etch out some time at the end for public comment. For new member here, Brian, if I remember right, there's somebody we're looking at a new member.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Brian put in an application and let me try
Cool.
and hold with that.
Great. Well, welcome to the team, Brian. Do you just want to give the rest of us a little background history, what you do, why you joined, etc.?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, Brian Hodges, the program manager for Rimrock Trails Youth Residential Services in Prineville, working with youth from 12 to 17 in a residential dual diagnosis environment. I'm also a person in long-term recovery. I've been involved in the recovery community for will be 20 years in September. So I just have a lot of passion for people seeking recovery or seeking to improve their lives in different facets. And so Erica, my director, had been involved with this for quite some time and turned me on to that. And so I was eager to join and see how I could help and participate.
Awesome. Yeah, well, you got a good director. Erica is freaking awesome person.
Yeah, she's awesome.
Cool. All right. Well then, Will, can we do a roll call?
Yeah, I'm gonna send that over to Ashley if Ashley is
Oh yeah,
ready.
Ashley. I'll get used to that here soon.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm just going to run down the list. So please respond if you are here. Got Jared,
Here.
John,
Here.
Frank, Stephanie.
Which one, Fred?
Oh, sorry. Stephanie Cameron, Amanda,
Here.
Steve,
Here.
Stephanie Mendenhall,
Here.
Stephanie Castaneda, Todd Nicholson,
And here.
Stephanie Slump,
Here.
Ed Smith, Craig, Brian,
Here.
and Sharon. Okay, that concludes roll call.
Okay. Thank you so much. And then Director Dolph, Annalise, you want to go ahead and give us some updates?
Yep. Good to see everybody. Annalise Dolph, I'm the director of the ADPC. Brian, it's nice to meet you. Anyone who works for Erica is very welcome on our team. Well, let's be honest, everybody's welcome on the ADPC team. I have just brief updates. The commission met, is it last week? We met last week. We had our first comprehensive plan quarterly update. So that was very exciting. That's what we spent most of the commission meeting on. So if you're curious, there's meeting materials on the website. Wes also gave an update of some school early intervention pilots that we're working with OHA to fund in rural areas of the state right now. So that's pretty exciting. Treatment committee also met already this month. They heard from HealthShare, really interesting deep dive data work that HealthShare has done around individuals with acute behavioral health needs, mapping healthcare and housing data together. So if that interests anybody, that's up. Really interesting conversations. Treatment is moving into kind of a framework for how they're approaching their work since they have so many things on their plate. You all are meeting today. Primary prevention meets next week, and they are continuing to focus on this concept that's in their strategies about scoping a primary prevention center of excellence. So what exactly that looks like and exactly what the workforce is that they're trying to get at with that. They are working on scoping that. And then health and safety interventions will meet later this month to continue their deep dive into naloxone. So anybody who's interested in opioid overdose reversal drugs and wants to do a deep dive on the efficient use of funding in the state and distribution models, et cetera, the health and safety interventions is going to be your fun place. And then the next commission meeting, I think I'm looking at my notes right now. That might be a TBD. We had planned to have some of our partners from OIA and DOC come and present on carceral SUD programs, but we've had some shifting staff. So stay tuned on commission meeting next month. The Opioid Settlement Board is meeting in May to agree on the framework for a request for proposals process for the last round of funding for this biennium. That we've had some really good discussions over the past few months about doing kind of a last one-time funding round for everybody to get their ideas out there. So we'll keep you updated on that. It sounds like it's going to be somewhat of a lengthy process. I think, as you all know, how these processes go through OHA. If we want to do a big public RFP process, it's probably going to be a little bit slow going. So the settlement board will be talking about kind of how to prioritize what priorities are. I do encourage folks, if you are interested, to submit written public comment or come and present public comment. Primary prevention has been coming out really strong to make sure they're still on the table. There's no intent not to fund anybody, but it is always good to hear from folks across the continuum of care. My one last note about settlement board funding is our goal is to kind of decide how to put out this one last one-time tranche of funding and then talk about what we fund longer term so that we can look at our amounts over the next 13 years and say, hey, maybe we can use this minimal amount to continue some funding so we can give longer term funding to some folks. So that is all I have there. If folks have any questions, let me know.
Yeah, any questions for Annalise?
Can I jump in with an update quick if there
Yep.
aren't
Oh yeah, go ahead, Will.
questions? Okay, cool. So, we've been working on our Recovery Community Center definition and also trying to do some engagement with it. And so we're working with OYA, Youth Addiction Alliance, the youth committee, for the ADPC. And gosh, like a week or two ago, we got to join their meeting and recovery committee along with Bay Area First Step. We talked about the definition that we've drafted as a recovery community, and then Bay Area First Step did a great job of sharing like what their program and adult centers look like. So we kind of had a discussion then after that, and the youth shared back some things on how a center might look and be defined from the youth perspective, sort of maybe adding or amending, the definition that we came up with, with that youth lens. And so over the next few months, we're going to continue that collaboration. I just wanted to let everyone know that that's something that's going on. And if you want to join that discussion, please let me know.
Cool. Thanks, Will. Stephanie Cameron.
Yeah, I had a question. I'm here at the upcoming settlement board meeting, Annalise, and there isn't a time. I don't see a time. I just see a date. You know what time those are?
They're always 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. And I can put the link in the chat.
All right. Awesome. Okay. So just to recap here where we're at with recovery center slash spaces. It's one of our goals that we see a recovery center slash space in every county, at least one in every county. We've taken steps to define what it is. We have weighed how to operationalize that definition, whether that's in statute, rule, or maybe just some guidance sent out to state agencies from the ADPC. That's something we're going to have to continue to weigh as we go forward. Knowing as well that advocates in the community who run recovery centers and stuff may run a bill themselves this upcoming session to try to codify their importance and solidify their sort of position long term. So that's something that might be sort of a back and forth, or we might be responding to different things. The legislature always does its own thing. And so we have our plan, and we're nimble, and we can make decisions as they arise. And then, naturally after sort of defining something, we have to determine how does it get funded. And so today, I want to have just an open discussion, and Will, you're going to take some notes, right, that capture it. And we're going to talk about like how do we fund recovery centers once we define them. And so I want to just start out and recap, what are the different funding sources that people currently use? And this should be an open discussion. So what are some of the different funding sources that you currently use? What's the benefit of it, drawback, et cetera? Just a really open dialogue, and then Will's going to capture the conversation for us. Amanda, I'm going to call on people. Amanda.
Sure, yeah. So we have historically partnered with the local CCO up in Portland, so CARE Oregon, to go ahead and provide funding for our community center. And since the new financial situations occurred at the federal level, that has kind of been taken. That fund has been taken back. But so currently we're funding staff through SOR4, and then using leftover funds from the CCO grants to cover our northern projects. And then in southern projects, we are using the opioid settlement funds.
Okay. How about you, one of the Stephanies?
I can go.
Okay, go ahead.
So we have also received CCO funding from CARE Oregon in the past. We have 2 large events that we host every year. We have a development director that promotes our monthly giving. We have monthly donors. We also receive funding through a number of pretty small foundation grants. And we pretty much write grants every single month here, all the time. It's just like we piece together as much as we can from all the different sources and cover as much as the budget as we can. And so far it's worked out, but this is the first year that it feels a little shifty. So we have some vacant positions that we're holding to try to see if we can make up some of the money we lost in the CCO contract. Sounds similar to what you all are experiencing.
Thanks. Stephanie Cameron.
Yeah, so we're a fairly new agency, but we have various different funding streams that are either really modest, all the way up to, our startup funding, which was, our startup funding was Measure 110. We are still a member of the burn. But we also, I just pulled up all my list here. So we have multiple different types of CCO funding. We have grant funding. We used to have a contract with Trillium, which is now, they pulled out of Lane County. So very much like Amanda was saying, we have some leftover funds that we're using to kind of cover people's FTE. We have foundation grants that we write. We have a training program, and so we get a very modest amount of money from our training programs. We have fundraising events. We have our local healthcare committee. So Lane Community Health Council provides us a couple different grants depending on what their fiscal year looks like. Um, and then OHA. So we have access to multiple different grants and different levels of funding through OHA, the Office of Recovery and Resiliency, Health Equity. And once again, we are consistently writing grants. Any grant that meets our mission and is a service that we provide, that we're writing grants for it.
Okay, cool. Jared.
We have multiple grants like Measure 110, SOR4. We have one foundation grant we got through Collins, and then just kind of piecing things together. It is starting to get a little tighter. So right now we're working with ODHS and ICWA and got one contract there. So hopefully more coming through the state. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
Okay. Steve.
Yeah, hi. We started out with Center of Excellency funding that came down many years ago. Opened our first center using those funds. We're still receiving some of those, and that helps a lot. We obviously received some opioid settlement funds for Curry County. We are members of our Bern and Coos County, and that helps support different activities and things at the center in Coos. And we have we even have some undesignated treatment revenue that helps support the programs.
So, Steve, are you saying that like some profits from treatment you redirect over to the recovery services?
Correct.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. We have a pretty small outpatient treatment program, and but it does generate some revenue that we use for that to help support those recovery centers.
Okay. John.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily add much. I think it's the piecemeal process of what you can find and squeeze and braid. Definitely foundation grants have been a support for us. And then I would also say, I'm not sure if everyone said like local health department. So county money, when they can give it. I know everyone's getting pinched, but I think county and city money. And I think, going forward, we're seeing recovery centers be used as, these community centers, especially in the metropolitan area, as we see nighttime only shelter become the new hit thing. There's this lack of daytime service, which for us is pushing to pressure more on the city and counties to say, hey, you're providing this evening service, we're providing this day service. How do we, receive some funding to offset the increase in demand?
Okay. Anyone I did not call on? That's running recovery center.
Bethy said in the chat, state funding. I don't know if you want to say any more about what kind of state funding.
Oh, thanks for catching that.
Oh, I meant more on the sense where I'm filling in for one of my coworkers. She couldn't come for this, but I am on the tobacco side, and there's a lot of people that have lost their tobacco grant. Therefore, they're almost unable to do a lot of the work they were doing prior. And so that was what it meant.
Okay, so I got CCOs, SOR, opioid settlements, some private donations, foundation grants, Measure 110, county funds, just OHA stuff, ODHS, and then we got some Medicaid profits. Now, John, you brought up piecemeal, and so let me ask you guys a question. In all of these grant funds that you're receiving, are they intended for recovery center? Is that what they're intended for? Or is the sort of intention or description, scope of work sort of something different, like peer service? Like, are you patching it together, you know, or are people funding you for the recovery center itself?
I get zero funds for the recovery center.
Okay. And what do you get funds for? Peer services?
Yeah, I mean, we get peer services. We do a lot of recovery housing navigation. So every once in a while, we'll get money to really fund that FTE, make sure that there's a lot of care coordination between the different recovery housing. We've gotten some funding for our workforce development. But none of it is really, we're taking these FTE and we're providing a recovery space. If we have peer mentors, then we have an ability to make sure that there's always drop-in peer supports, but we don't get any funds specifically for the recovery community center.
Okay. How about you, Stephanie? End it all.
You're always up against them wanting a project. And so we spend a lot of what we do into projects to keep sustainability. It's an active effort to try to figure out how to put together something that feels like a project. I would say our contracts, we definitely get paid for peer work for sure, but the center, because it's a cafe and we do meal service and we're providing, subsidized meals and things, we do get paid for the overhead for that. So I don't know if I'm answering the question correctly, but
Yeah,
it's
like
definitely written into every contract and grant that we have Recovery Cafe as a community recovery center.
Okay. Who does get money specifically for a recovery center where it's like in the contract it says this is what we're paying for?
Tony, I would say the money that we get kind of for that, it would be a foundation grant that we wrote. So I think if we call it out, we get it. So technically it happens, but not because, folks are offering it specifically for recovery centers.
Okay. Steve?
I would just say that the opioid settlement funding that we got is definitely to operate the recovery center. It's for 3 years. And the some of the facilitating center of excellence funding that we got originally was definitely for that, and I believe it still is somewhat designated for recovery center, but I could be incorrect about that, but I know it still helps.
Okay. So recovery centers are 100% grant based, and as Bethy said, drawbacks would be the cuts, right? Like the cuts, right? And then so there's a natural inclination to look at what is sustainable funding look like. And one of the pots of funds that has piqued people's appetite is Medicaid as a sustainable funding source for recovery centers. And so I want to talk about what is the ideal funding source or type of funding, that recovery centers would be most efficient in operating. And I don't think it's Medicaid. And I'll explain why. But before we get into what we don't want, what is it that we need as a recovery center? Like what kind of funding do we want so that we can carry out our work, if that makes sense? So like what would be the components of the grant that we would need in writing that would allow us to carry out the services within the definition we've been working on? And if people are hard time following, I can give an example, but I don't want to dominate the conversation. So, Amanda, let me start with you. If you're going to get your ideal funding, what would it look like? Not from who, but just in general, what would it look like?
Yeah, well, the funding I think would be multi-year, so that way we can go and have, or have not short-term goals, but be able to go ahead and track data over a measurable amount of time. And the financial bit would allow us to go ahead and charge occupancy costs, as well as administrative costs within there, because it takes a lot of administrative work to go ahead and run the centers for sure.
So you're saying occupancy costs plus the peer services, the service aspect.
The service aspect, and I mean, with the community center also comes like incidences, and so having, like funds that go ahead and go towards higher level staff and not just service staff too, would be very supportive as well.
Okay, so need some supervisors. Okay, John.
I think, yeah, obviously multi-year. I think also that funding that supports the definition of a recovery center, right? And I think when we talk about a recovery center, folks may drop in for minutes, hours, or extended periods of time, right? And I think a lot of times funding's tied to quick engagement or specific engagement, where sometimes if someone's at a recovery center for hours, they may be engaging with their peers, community, those kind of things that a lot of funders don't like to fund or find it challenging to fund because they're not receiving service from a professional. And so I think it's really funding that supports the definition and mission of a recovery center.
Okay. So understand and values the social aspect of it as sort of a deliverable outside of like how many units did you meet with somebody that day? Okay. Jared.
I'm just gonna piggyback off of what Amanda and John said. I mean, I think definitely the peer services, the occupancy. Um, I it just I struggle with the living on the grant piece, and I know that's the thing, but like a budget line item where the state is funding it is to me, and funding the definition and making sure that everything is covered, like that's where I'm at with that.
Okay. What about some of the unique things that you do at your center to serve your population that, may be hard for grantors to understand?
The cultural, definitely the cultural engagement piece, simple things like prayer stuff around like tobacco, and then we won't fund tobacco because it's like there's so many different cultural pieces and aspects that it makes it hard for us to we have to navigate it in a different way.
Yeah, like don't put purchasing sage in your grant application because they'll freak out.
Yeah, and then we have to go then we
They put supplies.
put supplies. So it's definitely
Not
the
that
way
that ever happened before.
it's the way you change it. But we've also found like a way to circumvent it by like taking clients out to pick medicine to help the community. Like, but it's definitely it makes it a lot harder for sure.
Okay. Stephanie, go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking about supplies or just any type of material to provide social activity, to provide engagement. In addition to everything everybody else has said, like you can have lots of staff, but if you don't have the money to buy, potentially books or activities or go do the thing, or maybe they're not paying for gas or a vehicle or transportation reimbursement. So there's a lot of other things that come with the social piece. If you want a really robust experience, you need to have a grant that's going to cover the cost of getting the things to do the cool stuff.
Okay, Amanda.
I think something that makes it cumbersome too is when someone receives a grant and then there's multiple teams that are navigating the funds, right? So for us, we received the funding through the opioid settlement board, and they split it into two teams. One was capital, and one was just like the general fund. And it doesn't seem like OHA had an under like there was different requirements that could have been streamlined to go ahead and just like have like consistent requirements versus okay, well, we're going to ask this of you on this side, but we're not going to be able to do that over here on this side. And so uh, I think just when it comes down to the execution of the grant, just having one team to go ahead and deal with.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about what would not be.
I think Stephanie Mendenhall has her
Oh,
hand.
okay.
Yep.
I'm
Go. Oh,
sorry, I
sorry, I
can't
didn't see
figure
it.
out how to raise my hand on here.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, it's great, isn't it? I was just going to say that it would be nice if there was a mechanism or a way to help sustain growth. So we've had such an increase in the number of folks that we serve, and it seems like it's really hard to continue serving the people who want and need the service because there's a constant like, oh, are we going to get enough funding this year to sustain the model? And so, I mean, I get that's the whole objective, but commitment to the work, I would say, what is the plan moving forward? Do we continue to help somebody grow to serve more, or is there a point where, you know, that piece just doesn't matter? I don't know. It just feels like there's no thought around what that looks like as far as growth and sustainability. And then the client support dollars. So we have a certain portion of our budget that we use to help prevent relapse and sustain people in their homes and those kinds of things. We don't pay rent, but just different things that they need to stay stable, which helps with long-term recovery. And I think that those client dollars really matter, the flexibility of those. So that'd be my comment.
Thanks. Steve, and then Annalise, you got your hand up. I'll get you next. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking about ideal sources of funding. Ideally, in my mind, OHA would recognize recovery centers as recovery community centers as being, realizing the value of them and would have some type of money budgeted for them that would allow us to operate like a recovery community center should operate. And I also wonder, just curious about the opioid settlement board is looking to, what are they going to do for 17 years? What do they want to keep invested in? And what might they want to stay invested in? I wonder if they might be able to fund a small portion of the continuation of make sure these are sustainable.
Cool. Thanks, Steve. Annalise.
So I was thinking about this as you guys were talking, but it really relates to what Stephanie just said. All the really experienced people in our state are all in this room. Do you all feel like there is a way to estimate based on a population number, like what that size or how many recovery centers? Like, do you all have a formula for, okay, if we're serving 100 people, we need this many supervisors and this many peers and this size of building? Or is it still too new to really know what that long-term kind of, if you were to keep growing to meet the need, what would it look like?
The only, for me, the only thing I have developed is sort of a base minimum for operations cost. Developed on just building size, which it's like it's nice to have at least 3,500 square feet, if you can, as a minimum. And then you at least need a supervisor, at least one person whose responsibility is sort of to cover the front desk, to be there available all hours, at least one. And then, three mentors to do one-on-one mentoring, and then those mentors can sort of cover the front desk, so the supervisor can, and so that sort of meets your minimum operation. But to Stephanie's point, I've never developed, hey, here's a cost per head, and here's how you scale it, because I never imagined that was possible, I guess, at the time.
I would just add to that. I think so much of it, we grab buildings where we can. And then it's the site on building size. Like we're restricted to whatever building we could afford or was available or whatever. And then kind of build a model, like Tony said, like what do we need to operate and then go from there.
So, I mean, that sort of model, right? Where it's a cost per head per occurrence, right? That is where I think it leads us to this Medicaid insurance discussion, right? Because that is more how that operates, right? And outpatient treatment, you have the, sort of these performance metrics, right? That you're using around productivity, right? And then once your productivity hits a certain threshold and more clients come in, then you hire another staff and the money comes in, right? And so from from that perspective, it's like, hey, this sounds really good, right? But there is some downsides to billing Medicaid, and I wanted to, talk about that next. What are the downsides to pursuing that and gather some thoughts. Steve.
Yeah, I just like to say one of the downsides, of course, is clinical versus peer run and that type of thing. And I want to just mention that I know that we're probably unique, but we are a peer run organization. Started out that way, will always be that way, and we happen to start an outpatient treatment program because we weren't happy with the way outpatient treatment wasn't being done in our area. It was just a lack of it, and um, and it's been really successful for us. But I do understand the hesitancy to mingle clinical with things like recovery community centers and stuff. But I will say that they can work together. I don't think it's best billed under a service plan or that type of thing. I don't think it works the best that way. But it would be nice if there was some type of waiver that would help. Cut off a portion of Medicaid funds to help fund these things. That's above my pay grade. I don't know how all that's done. I've tried to serve on committees that work on that stuff, and I really don't understand it. But but I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, we're similar. We started as a peer-run org and then it expanded into clinical services and, maintain our identity as a recovery org through that with clinical care, but we're a recovery org first, and it's kind of a philosophical thing almost. But anyways, Stephanie Mahkbo, and then we'll get Stephanie Cameron.
Um, I was just thinking when you were saying that before my days at MacBo, I worked for several years as a director and supervisor and counselor at an MOUD, and we were a cash pay for a long time. And I know this is like a different scenario, but I was just imagining the days where we turned into Medicaid, Medicare, accepting that. And it was great because we were able to help so many more people. But I mean, honestly, that's one of the things that burnt me out from being out there was the people I was working with. But I'm just thinking about like how accepting Medicaid for funding kind of trickles down to the team and the staff and how it changes sort of the motivation, even though I know that that's great money and it's coming from a great place and we can serve more people with that. Just thinking about how that affects sort of the expectations at the top and how that comes down to sort of the bottom, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it
Is
does.
what I
Thanks. Stephanie Cameron.
Yeah, I think one of the largest barriers is it's not designed for our service. And I think we've talked a lot about that. But even peer services, which are completely Medicaid reimbursable, they don't recognize standalone peer services. So you have to adjust or create a completely clinical program in order to file claims. And then just the process to get it as a CBO, the process to get it, we're in the middle of exploring that process, even though there's so many barriers. We found ourselves in a situation where we just decided to see what was going to happen. And we're still in that place. We're still trying to figure out how this is going to happen. Writing a complete application for a certification of approval where you're pushing back against the state that you shouldn't have to change your service delivery for this COA. I mean, it's not so much philosophical as like just trying to stand on some business around what the service that we provide and how that service is supported in other structures, but isn't supported in the structure that is completely peer support. And so there's so many different roadblocks to be a peer provider in a recovery community center to get Medicaid reimbursements.
Thanks, Stephanie. Jared?
I think I think there's definitely good and bad, but I think my biggest thing is like we have a hard time even explaining it in grants to be able to do cultural things. And now, due to the current administration, culturally specific services, and then having to utilize Medicaid through a cultural lens. And I just think it makes it, we already struggle, like you said earlier, even with grants, like we have to change it to, you know, supplies or cultural engagement activity materials or like things like that. So I think with Medicaid it might be harder for us.
Okay, let's see. Brian, downside can be limitations on how we can use the funding, repeated audits and admin work going into, yeah. So here's what I see that is sort of theoretically problematic, and then I'm just gonna talk candidly about even if we got over the theoretically problematic stuff, practically where we're at, in Oregon and being able to launch a whole new funding element in Medicaid. So, when we went over our definition, we determined that it's self-driven, right? It is self-driven. And a person kind of comes and goes as much as they want when they want, and regardless of where they're at in their recovery journey. Well, in insurance, it is clinically driven, and you're given a diagnosis and then a prescription to care, and you gotta um, be evaluated at that level of care, right? And then you only get reimbursed for so many things until a person's healthy enough, and then you're not reimbursed anymore. And so we would run the risk of every person who came into the recovery center would have to get a diagnosis, and then we'd have to bill codes on them, right? And so we may have hundreds of people coming to the recovery center. Do we have to get a diagnosis on all of them and do a treatment plan on all of them and fight insurance to argue why it's medically necessary? So that would be one issue. The other one is just the community aspect of the program being licensed. When OHA comes in to license your facility, they have a lot of restrictions on, confidentiality, how the rug looks, but there's just like there's a ton of stuff that I think it would be extremely problematic to try to get through that and still uphold what me and Deborah Buffalo Boy were talking about yesterday, which is this like home-like environment, for the recovery center. Not to say some treatment programs and aren't can't be homey feeling, but it's like a dentist office compared to like kicking it at the coffee shop after a meeting. Like we're trying to bridge those two things where it's kind of like homey. And then it would put recovery centers in direct competition with outpatient providers because it would probably be a similar level of care. And so, you can't bill on the same person at the same time for a similar service, right? And so if somebody's an outpatient, they can't get any services at the recovery center, which goes against sort of our continuum of care model that we're trying to create, where people are sort of, if they're in treatment, they're accessing the recovery center prior to leaving. So they have a soft spot to land, right? And then, if you talk about commercial insurance as well, the idea for recovery centers to get all people in recovery there, right? And to leverage the social capital that's in the recovery community, well, then you start to exclude certain populations depending on if you can bill for that insurance or not. And so it would essentially turn the recovery centers into an outpatient treatment program, I believe, which we would then lose the sort of synergy and stuff of the programming. Shira, and then I'll get you, John.
Hey, thanks. It feels like the collective is that Medicaid isn't the right funding source for these programs. So I'm just going to pile on. In that, like, we know we're going through pretty significant Medicaid reductions also. And, I'm a CMHP director, I'm a COA, like I'm deep in the Medicaid work. I know all about, how insurance can get in the way of peer support services and recovery services, and also just to add that those Medicaid dollars are also going to be highly competitive, right? And that even if an organization maybe is meeting COA requirements, the state has, they have obligations to fund safety net providers. There isn't going to be a surplus of Medicaid money necessarily to expand into additional treatment providers under this administration. So I also don't really know that Medicaid is like a reliable source of funding when we're talking about recovery centers or really any of our services right now, to be frank.
Yeah, and and I'm glad you brought that up because that's where I was going to go next. The feasibility of us launching a brand new funding element in Medicaid for this new thing with all these centers is probably zero right now. Maybe there's an opportunity in 4 years, but things that happen at the federal level right now, the consequences are going to take years for us to feel, and then any build back or something is going to take more years, right? So it's a long process. John?
Yeah, I know it's been mentioned, and I don't have the definition in front of me, but I remember we had a discussion about this non-clinical space. And so I think, I don't know if we actually put non-clinical in the discussion, but I remember it was a large, or in our definition, but it was a large conversation piece. And so I think, if we're talking about a clinical billable service in a site that we've determined non-clinical, that there's some disconnect.
Okay. So then what current funds that you guys are aware of, what would be ideal, right? What are some of the current buckets of funds that you guys know of or aware of that would be the ideal funding source? And let's say we did what Jared mentioned, or Annalisa's told me over the years, that we need like a service element, to some degree from the state for these specific things, and then the state takes the money in that can pay for them and then funds it, and make sure that the program's being funded. So Stephanie, go ahead.
I was just going to say Measure 110 was a perfect funding stream to start a recovery community center.
And why is that, Stephanie?
Well, there's quite a few reasons. First of all, it covers a lot of different service delivery. It encourages outreach. It supports those kind of non-demographical captures of encounters, right? So you can have 30 encounters a day with somebody or multiple people who maybe aren't ready to share their legal name or give you any sensitive information, or maybe aren't even ready to come inside the building yet. It's just really, it just provides a lot of space to reach our suffering community, which a lot of these other funding streams and even some grant fundings don't provide that kind of freedom to work and do that engagement piece, engaging people with the idea of recovery. Yeah, I can probably think about a whole bunch of other reasons, but that was one. They also they don't allow for capital, but they allow for space lease. Yeah, so.
Okay. Jared?
Yeah, but how do I say that? So Major 110 is always been under kind of like attack, and we're losing 14% here, we're losing this there. Like, and there's always this. So like the grant funding has definitely worked and continues to work. And I think that's like why we're having this conversation. Like, well, what about Medicaid? What about this? And you know, I think at the end of the day, the way is through the budget line item through the state, and like trying to figure out how that is. And I know people have worked on it for years, and people have been screaming and not been heard. But like because of and correct me if I'm wrong, but because of the Measure 110 cuts and all the cuts coming, that's why we're having these conversations around like Medicaid. And what is the other thing? It's like, yeah, no, it was great funding, but now everybody's after it. Like, and if it with Medicaid, it takes away the, you could say, homey feeling, and especially in a cultural space, it even makes it even more um harder to navigate. So I get that's just kind of a big word thought salad for everybody, but like that's kind of just where I'm at.
Okay, Shira.
I agree that like originally in the first round of M110 money, there was like a lot of flexibility. There's a lot of money and there was a lot of flexibility, and it's since been like on the decline. Still think there's some maybe opportunity there um, to use that funding for recovery centers. I would just add though also that for people that don't really understand like recovery work, and I think a lot of folks that maybe were on the like burn councils, there's so much conversation about, well, this should be Medicaid. Well, you could bill, right? Or you need to move these services into the clinical setting. And like all of that pressure really threatened, I think, the integrity and, meaningful orientation of the recovery work that was happening. And so much of that work that was used with M110 was used in this like pre-engagement, peer support, non-clinical kind of way, but ended up getting a lot of push from the council and the state to sort of morph those services into clinic services. So I just want to add that element talking about M110 money too. That's a part of the conversation there that I think just needs to be highlighted.
Yeah, and Measure 110, you know, it's kind of general funds for the state. I mean, it's allocated, right? But it's generated through state revenue, right? Through state income, and the state has a lot of discretion over how to use those funds versus Medicaid funds, for example, federal intergovernmental funds like SOR, et cetera, right? And then I seen you put, in there state general fund dollars. So it's discretionary funds that are flexible, that don't have a lot of strings attached, that the state can sort of say, okay, these are the strings we want to attach. Here's the definition. We see the value. Now we can fund it. And maybe it's, Measure 110. Maybe it's, Scepter's dollars when they're available. Maybe it's through some contract requirements with CCOs around some of their performance payments, although those went down, or some of the community benefit funds they have to put back in from their profits every year, right? The state has some levers that they can use to get the type of funds that support the fidelity and integrity of the recovery centers we're trying to develop. Stephanie, I seen your hand was up.
Yeah, I was just going to highlight, it wasn't so much about the funding stream itself, but how that particular funding stream allowed for the buildup of the Recovery Community Center. And I think that was the important piece. I think from what this little bit of time I've been in the conversations at this level, it looks like money's constantly kind of going from here to there to here to there. And the focus kind of changes every other year. But the one thing that was really consistent is that the money was focused, at least that particular time, was focused on really embedding recovery services into communities. And I think that was kind of like the magic piece of that particular funding stream when it came out. And so if there was unicorn funding stream, right? What are the components of that funding stream that are going to support the recovery community centers, either building them up in communities without access, helping us grow with communities that are growing and have more population, and then just how is it going to sustain us long term so that we're not opening and shutting down every 3 years? Not that that's happened, but I'm just saying.
It won't happen thanks to Annalise and Will. Okay, sorry, you guys. All right. Let me just check in with Will and Annalise real quick. Do you guys feel like you have enough information from us to sort of take back and to put something, into form about what we're capturing and saying, or is there more questions you have for us and how it relates to the plan as you're doing your work?
I mean, I'll hop in first. I think one of the things that I'd like to ask of this group is if folks are willing for us to continue to come back and do some deep dives. One of the things we're doing right now, and Sharon mentioned it in the chat, is the state agency financial assessment. And part of that is really digging into not just like state funds and what comes to you, but like what exactly this conversation we're having now, like what are the funding streams that OHA is already leveraging to give to you all, right? So that we can start to think about whether it might be that maybe they're using B funding stream that is better used over there. And if we could plug in A and C, that might work better. So that's part of the reason why I was asking, like, does anybody get community corrections funding, like thinking about the different pockets across agencies that we need to be looking at. So that's an ask of you all, and just maybe a heads up that we might be coming back to some of you and asking some more detailed questions so we can kind of piece together what we're seeing.
And Annalise, and if you want, and it seems simpler for y'all, like if you want to do like a just a quick survey or something, where we could sort of dig into our funding and reply in detail,
Yeah.
let us know, and I'll sign everybody up to fill that out.
Yeah. And then I think we could also we'll also bring back to you what is in, right, the financial assessment to be like, does this sound right? Is there something in here that surprises you? I mean, I think what I'm hearing is, and I think we're in the same boat with recovery housing, even though we're not talking about it yet. That yeah, it would be really great to have a general fund stream for recovery supports. We know we're not going to get that right now in these lean budget times, but like, what are the things? Where are the places that we can plug in and say you really need to prioritize, for instance, settlement board and burn funding for recovery centers, and it needs to fund these things. That's kind of what I'm hearing. Well,
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the idea of using this to create a survey and us just spending some time reading it through and making some more pointed questions to getting those back to you. Because we have a lot to go off here. We have the fun discussion about how do you currently fund your RCC, is the Medicaid discussion, and then the ideal way to fund. And so we got a lot of good stuff there.
Okay. Well, we have 20 minutes. I do not want to force everybody to sit in the meeting for 20 minutes, and if we don't have to. I know people are busy. So any last thoughts before I open up public comment? And then Annalise, I know you got your hand up. Any additional stuff you guys want to talk about?
Will and I both have our hand up now.
Yeah.
I have one more question.
Okay, go for it.
And this might be more for you, Tony, than anyone else. Is it different when we talk about funding and the elements that you're funding for a center that's for youth as opposed to adults? And in particular, I want to highlight transportation. I know Stephanie kind of glossed over that, but if really curious, one, youth and adult, is that different? And transportation generally, like, is everybody doing transportation? Are you doing bus passes? What are you doing?
I would say that just with youth, there is a demand for a higher level of care and a duty of care, which then it translates into um really competition in the workplace around workers who can deliver that ability to compete for the workers who can by paying higher salaries, increased oversight for youth, ability to work with parents, and then transportation is you have to do it. I mean, and I think that's any adolescent program, even in our outpatient services, we have to pick them up and even like from school, or they're a lot of them aren't coming, and that's a huge cost. It takes a lot of time. Now in Portland, it also has additional cost because people keep siphoning our gas and stuff out of our vans and breaking into them and stealing them and stuff. So those are like unforeseen costs that you don't, it's hard to quantify into a grant budget. And then, uh, yeah, transportation is critical, you know. Uh, Will and anyone else want Steve, go ahead, and then I'll get you Will.
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with transportation. We don't specialize in youth, but in our rural community and the way we operate our centers and stuff, geography here, transportation is critical and it's expensive, and people steal here too, believe it or not.
Okay, Jared, Stephanie, and Will, I'll come back to you last after we get the members.
I just wanted to take a second just to thank Annalise and Will for all of their continued hard work and efforts to, make sure to show up and support us. And is that a turtle in the background? Nobody's more turtly than you in the Turtle Club, Will.
It's a bookworm.
Thank you, guys.
All right, Stephanie.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Like transportation is an absolute necessity, and we have multi different types of layers for transportation. So we have group transportation to activities that are, more rural. And for us, we don't. A lot of our grants don't allow for capital costs, so we don't get to buy a van at this point in time. And so we are actually renting enterprise vans, which is a huge cost, and then this like extra layer of insurance that's necessary, and then all our peer mentors have to be able to transport their caseload, or else there's just so many things that we're not going to be able to get done. So many barriers to access to care and to the next thing that they need to be doing. And then for more stable individuals, we also have to offer like bus passes or day passes. We have people who come in, and if for whatever reason we're unable to necessarily assign them a peer that day, which unfortunately, since our funding cuts, that's happening more and more, we can't expect somebody to be able to get back to us. So we have to have day passes for people to get back so they can engage in services. And then we have to have month passes for people who are a little bit more stable. Maybe they're trying to achieve things on their own. And so they're provided bus passes to meet all of the other needs that they've got going on in their life, once they're kind of like cooking with their goals and with their recovery.
Cool, thanks. Steve.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have anything with my hand up.
Okay. Oh, all right, all right. Will, go ahead.
Yeah, there was a question, it might have been John, and the question was about whether non-clinical and clinical was mentioned in our recovery community center definition. I just wanted to bring up the definition again.
Okay.
Seems like a good opportunity. And so, yeah, here we go. All right. Let me back up one, because this is our official definition, this long thing. It's kind of morphed a few different ways over time. I'm going to jump right to the next slide, though. That's more of a stripped down sort of to the point definition. I kind of think of that other one as like our website definition. Okay, so we do not mention any sort of clinical element, non-residential, peer operated, paid director and recovery staff, drop-in hours, peer support, recovery and social support services, typically free of charge to participants. Participants are youth and adults experiencing challenges or obstacles consistent with recovery from a SUD. And those recovery and social support services we mentioned above are social activities, fostering relationships, navigating community resources, hosting mutual support meetings, connection to employment resources and opportunities, advocacy, education, and volunteer opportunities. I see Steve's hands raised. Sorry, Tony, I don't want to take over your job.
Yeah, I would just, what I would recommend on that is to not, I don't think our definition specifically mentions clinical or not, or says it's non-clinical or says it's clinical, but I would recommend not mentioning it, period, just because there are creative ways sometimes to where occasionally someone can get, you can get paid for some event, or not event, but we'll say for a person out of 20 people that attend a workshop or something you do, assuming that it's written into a plan or that type of thing, and the peers credentialed and so on. So I would think of it as not wanting to necessarily put handcuffs on it, but keep with all the definition we have about it being social and all that type of stuff, because we don't want it to be a clinical space, but I would not want to eliminate the possibility of being able to be reimbursed for a service that might be reimbursable.
Yeah, thanks for reading that well. And I think, my part of my point was you don't necessarily need a diagnosis to
Yeah.
receive service, right? And so I think that's the part where I don't necessarily think we need to call it out, but we also don't call out that you need a diagnosis. And so I think that's the important part when we talk about different funding streams.
Yeah, for sure. And part of that portion of participants and our youth and adults experiencing challenges or obstacles consistent with a SUD was sort of also to get away from needing that diagnosis. So cool.
Okay. Annalise, Will, anything else? All right, moving to public comment. Anybody want to weigh in from the public? All right.
And Tony, I did not receive any written public comment.
Oh, okay, cool. Awesome. Well, great. Thanks y'all. And for the members who are, a part of this, who are not, operating recovery centers, thank you so much for listening, and supporting. I know you are in meetings all the time and busy, so we really appreciate you showing up. And I'm happy to give you some time back in your day.